Hey, it's Katie, and welcome back to my BookTube channel. Today, I am doing my March wrap-up, so I'll be telling you guys all of the books that I read this month, and again, I managed to read 15 books, which I constantly surprise myself because I started this month off really slow. I felt like I was reading way slower than the past few months, but then I had a week where I read like 6 books in just 1 week, and I don't know how I did that, but yeah, so I read 15 books this month and between 5,000 and 6,000 pages, which is crazy. I don't know if I'll keep this up the rest of the year, but I am definitely on track to make my Goodreads goal of 100 books. I'm already at 46 or 47 now, so that's exciting. But anyway, this video will be me telling you guys my thoughts on the books that I read this month. So let's jump into it. The first book I read in March was Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist by Rachel Cohn and David Levithan. And this follows Nick, who just got dumped, and his ex ends up walking in with her new guy. And so Nick turns to the girl next to him and asks her to be his girlfriend for the next 5 minutes. And the girl, Nora, also knows the girl and does not want to talk to her, so Nora turns to Nick and kisses him. And after this kiss, they decide to go on their first date, and they go on all of these adventures around Manhattan. This book was a very quick and easy read. It was a pretty average book to me. If you couldn't tell by the cover, this is a very old YA book. It came out in 2006, and it definitely reeks of old YA. It definitely gives you those similar vibes, and so it's very different from the books that I typically enjoy now. So the tone and vibe was a little weird for me, but it was still a pretty enjoyable read. There is also a lot of angst in here, so if that's something you like, you'll probably enjoy this. But there were some parts and some references that were made in here that kind of confused me. So again, a pretty average read. I enjoyed their adventures, but nothing really stood out to me. And it could be that I just don't enjoy Rachel Cohn and David Levithan's writing, because I did read Dash and Lily's Book of Dares, I think last year, and I thought that one was pretty average too. Again, I enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed that one a little bit more than this one, but it was enjoyable. It was another quick, easy read, but nothing that would really make me recommend those books to people, so their writing just might not be for me. After that, I picked up An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson, and this is a standalone fantasy that I really, really enjoyed. And this follows Isabel, who is a painter in this world where there are fair folk who are immortal creatures that cannot do any human craft or it could kill them. And so they hire Isabel to paint portraits of them. And she ends up getting her first royal client, who is Rook, the Autumn Prince. And she makes the mistake of painting human sorrow in his eyes. And this could be deadly for him and also could cost him his throne. And so he comes back one day and tells her that she needs to come with him and go on trial because she's putting him and his throne at risk. And so they go on this journey to the trial, and along the way there are a lot of attacks that they both have to fend off, and through all of that, they start to trust each other and kind of care for each other. The whole concept of this book is really cool. I loved that the immortal characters have this one weakness, which is that they can't do any human craft, because I feel like in a lot of fantasies when you have immortal creatures, they seem kind of untouchable and like nothing can really hurt them. And so I loved that. It was kind of ingrained in our brains from the very beginning of this book that they do have a weakness, and I thought that was really fun, and I also loved the writing. This world felt very beautiful to me, and it felt very seasonal, not in the way that you have to read this during a certain time of year, but in the way that you really can feel the vibe of the story. So it feels a lot like fall and autumn because Rook is the Autumn Prince, but through their journey to the trials, they also cross through a lot of other kingdoms, and one of them, I think it's spring, and so you get that vibe while you're there, and it's just really cool to kind of see the different parts of the world and the different vibes you can get in just one book. My only problem is that I wish this book was longer. Since it is just a standalone, I was left with some questions, and there were certain parts that I really wanted more of, and that could just be great writing by Margaret Rogerson because it left me wanting more, but at the same time, I was left wanting more. So I really wish it was just a little bit longer to fulfill those needs and answer those questions. The next book I picked up was Fame, Fate, and the First Kiss by Casey West, and I love Casey West's writing, so I was very excited to pick this one up. And this one follows Lacey, who is an aspiring actress who's getting her first big break, but she quickly learns that being in the spotlight isn't everything that she imagined it to be, because she's having trouble connecting with her co-stars. There's somebody sabotaging her on set, and her father hired this local boy named Donovan to be her tutor. And all she wants is to figure out why somebody's sabotaging her, to figure out how to get chemistry with her co-stars, and to make sure that Donovan is not going to be a distraction for her because all she wants is to focus on her career. Like I said, I love Casey West, so her writing in this book was so enjoyable for me. It was very humorous and very fun. The characters were also really fun, and I really thought the relationship was adorable. It was just such a sweet relationship, and I was really rooting for them. And even though in the synopsis it tells you that she's trying to figure out who's sabotaging her, I really didn't expect that mystery to take up as much of the book as it did, but I honestly really enjoyed it. I thought it would just be a romance, but the mystery element was a really fun addition to the story, and it really kept me interested through the remainder of the book. I feel like Lacey and Donovan really managed to grow together throughout the book, and like I said, the relationship was really sweet. So if you enjoy Casey West and you're looking for a sweet romance, I would recommend this to you. Next up, we have Parachutes by Kelly Yang. And parachutes are basically these teenagers that get sent to the United States to live with host families and go to school there, while their wealthy parents stay back in Asia. And so one of our main characters, Claire, is a parachute, and that's something she never thought would happen to her, and she's not really sure what to do with this newfound freedom. And the most eligible parachute also asks her out, so that's something that she's also trying to navigate. And our other main character is Danny, who is Claire's new host sister, and Danny is really kind of upset that her mother decided to have Claire live there. She really wants nothing to do with her, and she is on the debate team because her main goal in life is to go to Yale, and her debate coach ends up coaching her privately, and this kind of takes her life through some twists and turns. I feel like the main thing you should know about this book before you go into it is that there are some content warnings you should know. It deals with sexual assault and rape, and I appreciate that before you even get to the first chapter, there is a page that gives you these content warnings. I love that Kelly Yang was very aware that this was something that the readers should know, and I definitely think you should be prepared to see that in this book because it's not just one little element. It does deal with a lot of the effects after it happens, and it does take up a good amount of the book, so that is something you should be aware of before you pick this up. But honestly, this book, it was hard for me to get into because I really felt like I was going to DNF it for a while in the first chunk of this book, which I feel horrible to say because it does do a really good job of the commentary of rape and sexual assault and how that affects people and all the victim blaming and all of the terrible things that go with it. And that is great commentary, and that's what kind of saved this book for me was that conversation that it started and the way that affected me emotionally. But before that, I didn't really connect to either of the characters, and it is told from dual perspectives, so you do kind of get a chance to see both characters, but to me, their tones were very similar, and because there are very short chapters, you bounce back and forth so often that I couldn't really keep straight who I was reading, and I had to keep checking back at the beginning of the chapter to see whose perspective it was. Also, there were a lot of toxic relationships in this book, so that made it hard for me to read as well, but as terrible as it sounds, once the sexual assault and the rape occurred, it made the book more interesting to me, which that's such a weird thing to say, but I think Kelly Yang did an amazing job of navigating rape and sexual assault and, like I said, the victim blaming and all of the guilt and the emotions that people go through when these things happen. And it's just very important to read that part. And I think Kelly Yang especially did a great job because I think she also has some personal experience with that, which she also talks about in the author's note in the book. So if you're interested in something like that, this book is definitely a good book for you to read, but if that's not something you really want to read about or you don't think you can read about, I definitely would stay away from this book because, like I said, it is a big part of the content. After that, I read The Queen's Assassin by Melissa De La Cruz, which was an ebook, so I don't have that with me. But this book follows Cal, who is the Queen's one and only assassin. And he is bound to the Queen because there is this vow that he needs to track down these ancient magical scrolls that were stolen years ago. And on the other hand, we have Shadow, who has been trained to follow in her mom and her aunt's footsteps. But even though magic is forbidden and outlawed, she has been practicing to control her powers in hopes of becoming an assassin like Cal. And all of a sudden, this attack happens that brings the two of them together and forces them to team up and track down the scrolls. And along the way, they uncover this web of lies and secrets that change the world as they know it and kind of challenge everything that they hold dear. If you didn't know, I was doing the alphabet reading challenge until the end of this month, and so the main reason that I picked up this book was because it counted for the letter Q, and since I recognized Melissa De La Cruz as an author, I decided this would be a good one to pick up, but I had no idea what the book was about, and I was pleasantly surprised. I enjoyed this book way more than I thought I would, and it left me wanting more, so I will probably end up picking the sequel, which, again, I was very surprised by. But it was very enjoyable. The magic was a cool element, but I honestly really loved the assassin quest that they went on. I feel like books that involve quests, it's kind of like a big trope that you see in YA, and it's not something I usually gravitate toward. Usually a book has to have a lot of romance or, a lot of other elements to draw me in, but the quest was actually really cool, and I honestly really enjoyed reading about it. Also, this might be like a tiny spoiler, but I don't really think it is, but it did include the one bed trope, which I'm a sucker for. I feel like I don't read a lot of books where there is the one bed trope, so that was kind of fun for me. It was just a tiny part of the book, but definitely made me happy. There were definitely plot twists and a huge cliffhanger at the end of this book. So like I said, I need to pick up the second book that I think just came out, but I need to know what happens. And I loved watching Shadow and Cal work as a team. They're really great together, and I'm excited to see more of them in the sequel. The next book I read was Zen Diagram by Wendy Brandt. And this was another book I picked up just because it counted for the letter Z for the alphabet challenge. So I went into it with no expectations. I hadn't even heard of this book before I saw it at the library, but again, surprised me. I really enjoyed this one. And this follows Eva, who she is a loner and a math nerd, but she's a loner by choice because she has this ability that if she touches anybody or any of their belongings, she gets insight into their secrets, insecurities, and all of their fears. And so she tries to avoid that because it really affects her. But one of the kids that she's tutoring in math left their jacket behind, and she goes to pick it up to hand it to him, and she gets overwhelmed by these dark, negative emotions, and that kind of draws her in, and she can't really stay away from him after that. I feel like this is such a unique concept. I've never read a book with a character who can just touch somebody or something and gets all of these like emotions and insights into who they are as a person. I feel like that's really cool, but it also kind of sucks for her because she can't really touch anybody without that happening to her. But I loved that that was such a huge part of this book and a huge part of Eva as a character. Also, there were a lot of plot twists. I feel like every book has plot twists, but these ones really caught me off guard because I kind of expected this to be a lot more of a fluffy read, even though it does say that his jacket has these like dark vibes to them. I didn't really focus on that. I thought it would be really fluffy, and it kind of was. It had elements of that. I feel like Eva and Zen's relationship was very sweet and definitely rooting for them, but it also had some darker plot twists that I was not expecting, but it really kept me engaged, and honestly it made it more emotional to read, which I was not expecting. Both of these characters have a lot of hurt and grief that they are dealing with from their past, and there are also some Romeo and Juliet moments because it kind of has moments of like forbidden love, so that adds extra elements too. But if you've never heard of this and you're looking for an interesting romance, I would definitely give this a chance. After that, I read The Unexpected Everything by Morgan Matson, and I wasn't really sure how I was going to feel about this because I previously read Save the Date sometime last year, and that was pretty average for me. I didn't really connect with Morgan Mattin's writing or with the characters, but it was still a pretty enjoyable book. But I was really hoping that I would enjoy this one more, and thankfully I did. I'm just going to tell you guys the little that I knew before going into this, and that is that our main character, Andy, had her whole life planned out until her dad had this political scandal that happened, and it kind of ruined all of her summer plans. And so she is stuck at home with him, and she doesn't really know what to do, and she ends up walking dogs and hang out with her friends, and there's definitely some adventures she goes through, but you kind of get to see her cope with family life and work through her friendships and figure out what she really wants in life. And also you get to see a lot of really cute dogs, which the cover did not disappoint. I was really hoping we got to see a lot of the dogs because that was a main selling point for me and picking up this book, honestly. But like I said, I was pleasantly surprised by this book. I enjoyed Morgan Mattin's writing in this one way more than Save the Date. I feel like it was very humorous, and I really enjoyed getting to see Andy and the dogs and the love interest and all of that. I feel like it was very enjoyable for me. This book was a little bit longer than I was expecting. I feel like it could have been a little shorter because it is a little bit over 500 pages, which is very long for a contemporary, at least the ones that I've read. So I wish it was just a little bit shorter, and it would have left me wanting more instead of me kind of waiting for it to wrap up toward like the last 100 pages. But definitely a good read. Up next is one of my favorite books of this month and also of 2021, and that is Well Played by Jen DeLuca. And that's probably not a surprise to you if you watched my February wrap-up, because that's when I read Well Met, which I adored. And I was so excited to be back in this world and to be back with these characters. I felt like meeting up with old friends. This is just a companion novel though, so if you haven't read Well Met, you can still read this one, but it's definitely fun if you get the whole experience and read both of them. But this one follows Stacy, who was friends with Simon and Emily in the first book, and it follows her through kind of a long distance relationship with one of the other Renaissance workers. It's one of the people from the Dueling Kilts, and he is traveling to a whole bunch of other Renaissance fairs, and so they talk through email and through text, and then the Renaissance fair comes back to Stacy's town, and so they meet up face to face. And this sounds like a spoiler, but it's on the back of the book, but the person that she's been messaging is not the person that she thought she was messaging, and so she meets up face to face with somebody she wasn't really expecting, and it definitely throws her for a loop because it's a big plot twist in her life, obviously. Like I said, I loved diving back into this world and meeting these characters. It definitely felt like being with old friends. It made me so happy. And Jen DeLuca's writing is amazing. I don't know if she has anything else other than Well Met and Well Played, but if she does, I definitely have to read it because she is quickly becoming one of my favorite authors of all time. Miscommunication is not something I usually enjoy in books. Like, if characters just could have a simple conversation and fix their issues, that usually annoys me if they don't. But that's not really the case with this book. I feel like it was a very important plot point, obviously. And because I didn't read the full synopsis before picking this up, I just knew it was the companion novel to Well Met. I also didn't know that the person she was messaging was not the person she thought. So it was a big plot twist for me, just like it was for Stacy. But it was definitely very enjoyable, and I definitely ship Stacy with her love interest. So you should definitely read this. It's so good. It makes me so happy. I could just stare at this cover for so long, and it just brings me back to the world, and I can't wait to read. I think it's called Well Matched is the next one in this series, but I think it comes out sometime this year, and I need to get my hands on it as soon as possible because it just makes me so happy. Jen DeLuca's writing it draws me in, and I can't stop smiling. Another book I read this month was Storm and Fury by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and this was another ebook I read, so again, I don't have it with me, but this book follows Trinity, who is going blind, but she can also see ghosts and spirits, and she has this gift that she's kept hidden from everybody in this compound. She's kept it hidden from everybody in the compound that she's lived in for years, basically. And the other people that live in this compound are actually wardens or gargoyle shape-shifting people. And that's so cool. I feel like I've never read a book with that. So I was very excited to see that kind of paranormal creature. But anyway, basically her gift she's kept hidden from everybody, and if demons find out, they will come and try to kill her and use her powers to enhance their own. And all of a sudden, there's this creature that's going around killing demons and wardens, and nobody knows what's happening. And when this happens, Trinity ends up meeting Zane, and he is the most annoying person in the world to her, but they end up having to team up to figure out what is happening and who is killing all of these wardens and demons. I love Jennifer L. Armentrout's writing. I remember reading, I think it's called the Lux series. I read that when I was maybe in middle school. It was when I first got my Kindle, and I was so excited to read whatever books I could get my hands on. And that series was one of my favorites for the longest time, and I hadn't read another Jennifer L. Armentrout book since then, so it's been a long time, but it just drew me right back in. She's such a great writer. I also loved The Cool Paranormal World because, like I said, I've never read a book about gargoyles, so I loved that. And then there were still demons and angels and all of those creatures that I've always loved reading about. So that was such a cool world to dive into. Also, Trinity and Zane are honestly kind of hot together. I loved the chemistry. I love seeing the scenes of them together, and I'm so excited to continue this series. I actually have book 2 already from the library. I haven't started it yet, but I definitely plan to read it in April because I need to know what happens. I need to see more of Zane and Trinity. The book I read after that is Once and For All by Sarah Dessen, and this book follows Luna, who helps her mother with her wedding planning business, and because of this, she has seen basically every outcome possible for people's perfect day, and so she is very cynical when it comes to happily ever afters. And one day she meets Ambrose, who is this very handsome serial dater, and she tries her best to stay away from him because she doesn't really take him seriously, but Ambrose is convinced that he can change her outlook on love. Before I tell you my thoughts on this book, I wanted to let you guys know that there is a content warning, trigger warning for this book. It is kind of a small part, but it is about Luna's past, and I can't tell you here because it is kind of a spoiler, but if you want to know, I have my Goodreads link below. I did include it in my Goodreads review, so if that's something you're concerned about, please go ahead and check that out. This was a very enjoyable romance for me. I really enjoyed the whole concept of this, and I really just wish that we saw more of them together. It took them a while to kind of have, they had a ton of scenes together, but it took them a while to have a lot of romantic scenes together, so I do wish that there was more of that, but I really enjoyed it, and it was way more emotional than I was expecting, although I have read a Sarah Dessen book before, so I should have known better. But this book almost made me cry, and I don't cry while I read. It's very rare that a book makes me cry. Actually, I'm not even sure a book has ever actually made me cry physical tears. I usually just cry on the inside. So the fact that I was very close while reading this book says a lot. Up next, we have The Voting Booth by Brandy Colbert. And this follows Marva, who's been waiting her whole life for the moment that she gets to vote for the first time. And she's done everything possible to help people get ready for voting. She's gone canvassing and she's helped register people for voting. And so it's obviously a very important moment to her. But after she's leaving the polls, after voting for her first time, she looks over and she sees that Duke is being turned away from the polls. And so she takes it upon herself to make sure that his vote is counted. And so they run all over town trying to make sure that it is counted. And there's also the fact that her cat ends up getting lost, and so they also organize kind of a search for her cat. So it's kind of just a small tidbit, but surprisingly takes up a decent chunk of this book as well. But this book is filled with amazing writing, and I loved the characters we got to meet. I feel like they're so well done. It was easy to connect to both of them, and it was really great to get to know them because this book was told from dual perspectives, so I really appreciated that. But it was a very quick and easy read, which I was surprised because I feel like the fact that it's called The Voting Booth, and it does deal with a lot of very important topics, which I'll get to in a second, but I felt like it would be maybe a little on the boring side because of how educational I expected it to be. But even though it was educational, it was written in such an exciting way that I never wanted to put it down, and I'm so happy that that's how I felt about it. I feel like this is such a great book for anybody to read because there's very important commentary on voting and gun violence and abortion laws and race and so many things. And it really kind of opened my eyes and definitely educated me a little bit. So I definitely think that everybody should give this book a chance. After that, I read The Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater, which is the second book in the Raven cycle. And I'm not going to tell you too much about what this one's about because it will be spoilers for book 1. But this one, you get a little bit more of Ronan and Noah, which I appreciated because they were kind of mysteries to me. So I love that you kind of get to dive more into them. And I honestly enjoyed this way more than I enjoyed the first one. The first one, I didn't really understand the world or like the quest too much, and I was kind of more confused than I thought I would be, and I still really enjoyed it. I think I gave it maybe 4 stars, but I didn't enjoy it as much as everybody kind of made me feel like I should have. But I loved this one. This one, like I said, way better than the first one, and I finally feel like I understand why there's so much hype around this series. I feel like I finally understood the world. I was, like I said, very confused while I read the first one, but I finally feel like I kind of understood the world, and the writing was beautiful. I love diving back into it and meeting these characters again, and the only thing is, I feel like Blue's family still kind of confused me because she has so many women in the same house, and even though you kind of just see the same like 3 or 4, I still can't really keep them straight. So maybe after reading books 3 and 4, I'll finally be able to do that. But that part still kind of confused me a little bit. But overall, like I said, I loved this one so much, and there is a huge cliffhanger at the end of this, and I need to know what's going to happen. But I did just get books 3 and 4, so hopefully soon I'll be able to binge the series, and I am just very excited. I'm so glad I enjoyed this one more than the first one. I feel like I said that a billion times during this little blurb, but it just makes me really happy. After that, we have another one of my favorite reads of this month, and that is Lore by Alexandra Bracken. This is a mythological urban fantasy, and it takes place in modern New York, where the Agon takes place. And basically, in order to punish the gods and goddesses in the past, Zeus created the Agon, where every 7 years, for 7 days, the gods and goddesses walk the earth as mortals, while the descendants of their bloodlines hunt them down. And if they're killed, the person that kills them gets their immortality and their powers. And our main character, Lore, after her family was murdered, she wants absolutely nothing to do with this. She's just trying to survive. She really wants to stay away from the games as much as possible. But she comes home one day to find Athena wounded on her doorstep, basically. And they end up creating this alliance to find a way to take down their common enemy and to stop the Agon forever. Or at least to get away from the Agon. I honestly am a little obsessed with this book because I've always loved mythology growing up. I feel like it's something I've always been interested in, so I loved recognizing the names of gods and goddesses, but I also don't really know too much about mythology, so I was pleasantly surprised that I feel like everything I needed to know was included in this book. I was honestly a little worried about that because before picking it up, I did see some reviews where people felt like they didn't know enough about mythology to read this book and they were pretty confused. So I'm happy to say that that's not what happened for me. I feel like I was able to learn a lot about the world and the parts of mythology that were picked out for this retelling, and that made me really happy. Also, the Agon itself kind of reminds me of the Hunger Games because it's very fast-paced, it's very brutal, and it's about people like hunting down other people. So it gave me kind of similar vibes to that. So if that's something you kind of are interested in, I definitely think you should give this one a chance. I really loved Lore as a character, and I also really loved Castor, who is another main character we see in here. I feel like they're really cool, and I loved watching them work together as a team. But I'm so happy that I enjoyed this because I had very high expectations. I'm pretty sure I included this in my 5-star predictions, which I'm very happy to say that I did give this 5 stars. But also I was very excited and kind of nervous because both Owl Crate and Fairy Loot included this in their January boxes. So I feel like that's a sign that it's a very good book, but also I have 2 copies of it. So I was really hoping I would like it. So I felt like I needed both of those copies, and I'm happy to say that I do. Up next, we have one of my comfort reads, which is Beautiful Disaster by Jamie McGuire. And this is a book I've had since middle school or earlier. I didn't really own a lot of books when I was younger. I had like The Hunger Games, Twilight, and Divergent, I think, and maybe a couple others. But this was one of the only romances that I owned. And so I've read this book so many times, I've lost count. And this is when I would take on vacations with me, everything like that. So definitely a comfort read. And I hadn't read it in at least 5 years, I think. It's been a while. So I was excited to pick it up again. And I still enjoyed it. I was very happy because sometimes I go back and I read books I used to love and I'm like, why did I like this? But anyway, I realized I didn't tell you what this is about. This is like a bad boy, good girl romance. And the bad boy is a fighter. So when he meets Abby, he is kind of taken by surprise because everybody kind of knows his reputation. If not his reputation as a fighter, it's definitely his reputation as a player. And so she kind of looks at him very innocently and doesn't really have any expectations for who he is. And so that really gets his attention and gets him to be interested in her. And so they have a bet, and if he loses, he has to be abstinent for a month, and if she loses, she has to spend a month with him in his apartment. This story honestly kind of reminds me of something you'd find on Wattpad. I love any like bad boy story on Wattpad, and this kind of gives me similar vibes. So if that's something you enjoy, you should definitely try this book out. There is a lot of drama and miscommunication in here though, so if that's something you don't enjoy, maybe don't try it. And usually it's something that irritates me, but I honestly kind of thrive on it in this book, and that might be because it's such a nostalgic read for me. I'm not sure, but I definitely still enjoyed it. Even though I feel like the relationship is more toxic than I remembered. There's definitely elements where I know that it's not healthy, but I enjoy reading about it anyway. So I don't know what that says about me, but we're going to ignore that. We are finally on the last book that I read this month, and that is When Dimple Met Rishi by Sandhya Menon, and this is an audiobook I listened to. It's one of the few audiobooks I've actually listened to this year. I'm surprised I haven't listened to more, but I actually haven't finished it yet, so I don't really have too many thoughts. I have about an hour or a half hour left, so I'm almost there, but if you want my full thoughts, I will leave a review on my Goodreads, so again, it's linked down below if you are curious. But this follows two Indian main characters, and on one hand we have Dimple, whose mother is determined to find the perfect Indian husband for her. Even though Dimple is way too young for that, she wants nothing to do with marriage yet. All she wants is to go to this summer program for web developers. And so she finally finds a way to convince her family to let her go there. And she is very excited to focus on her career and get away from her mother's expectations for her love life. And then on the other hand, we have Rishi, who has also been raised in a traditional Indian household, but he kind of embraces it. He really loves the traditions, and he kind of accepts the thought of this arranged marriage that his family has decided for him. And so when they tell him that the girl who is destined to be his future wife is going to the summer program, he decides, I'll go there too, why not? We'll just see what it's about, we'll see how we get along, and so he goes there to meet her. I wasn't sure how I would feel about it, but I am honestly really enjoying it. I'm enjoying it a lot more than I thought. I thought this would be like a 3, maybe a 4-star read, but it honestly could potentially be a 5-star read for me. I'm not too sure yet, but it's really good. And I think I appreciate that I'm listening to it in the audiobook format because it's told from dual perspectives, but there are 2 different narrators, so that kind of helps me figure out whose perspective it's told from, and I think it really adds to the reading experience for me, so that's really fun. And I love learning about Indian cultures and traditions, and that's just really cool to me, so I'm loving it. I'm loving Dimple and Rishi's relationship together. I feel like their banter and their vibe is like super fun, and this book is just honestly making me really happy, and it's definitely what I needed to end the month of March. If you've made it this far, thank you for sticking it out through the 15 books that I read this month. I know it's a lot. It's probably going to be a very long video, but thanks for sticking through it. Those are all the books that I read this month, and if you did stick through all of this, please comment below how many books you read this month. I'd love to know. But please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I would really, really appreciate it. And if you do subscribe, click the notification bell so you know when I upload next. But thank you guys so much for watching. I can't wait to see you in my next video.